Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening's presentation by Carl Fisher from Save Our Canyons. Carl Fisher is the executive director of Save Our Canyons, a nonprofit working to protect the wildness and beauty of the Wasatch Mountains. He graduated from the University of Utah with a BS in geography and a BS in environmental studies. He has served on the intergovernmental panels to update and revise land use plans and ordinances that govern land use in the Wasatch Mountains and the protection of their watersheds and other natural values. He was the founding member of the advisory board for the Governor's Office of Outdoor Recreation and is currently the chair of the Salt Lake County Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Balancing access, managing recreation, protecting landscapes, and restoring natural processes, striving for the health of places we love to play are his focus. He believes our enjoyment of the wild landscapes should not alter, but enhance and support ecosystem functionality and repair mistakes of the past, like removing fire from forest ecosystems. He's a lifelong Utah resident who learns more and more about the profound relationship between our communities and the wild every day. He loves sharing time outdoors with his wife and two young daughters, and recently with their COVID canine Huckleberry. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, and hello to everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be sharing some things that are going on in the Wasatch Mountains today. I'm gonna fly through a presentation. I have a lot of information to share with you. I hope it's helpful, but I have to admit at first I'm feeling a little scatterbrained because there's a lot going on, and I just feel like my brain these days is struggling to keep up with everything that's going on. So I hope to have a robust discussion with folks after that, and love to engage in some conversation and some Q&A with you all. So with that, I'm going to start sharing a presentation that I've prepared, a guide, just to keep me on track tonight. And just again, thanks so much for the opportunity to share with you all. And I need to go play. So we have a lot of challenges facing the central Wasatch Mountains. It's of course compounded by a number of issues, but it is important to note that the Wasatch Mountains are one of the most heavily used forests in the country. Just as a national treasure, as an icon of our public land system. At the national level, of course, we have world-renowned skiing, world-renowned recreational opportunities outside of ski areas as well. But this is also a critical ecosystem and certainly a watershed for people in the regions and the growing regions that are surrounding these mountains. One of the reasons Save Our Canyons mission and our goal is to protect the wildness and beauty of the Wasatch Mountains. There are so many values, and I just kind of a smattering of photos that I feel gets to some of the values that we have, whether it's the visual opportunities for reflection, the ecology, the biology, wildlife, adventure, finding solitude, just the setting of our community, particularly here in the Salt Lake Valley, that these mountains provide. There's so many values and there's so many sophisticated relationships. And part of what Save Our Canyons wants to try to do is help decision makers, land managers, in communities, recreationists, concerned citizens understand the oftentimes competing values that we're up against. And so just a little context, in 1970, Salt Lake County's population was under 500,000 people. Annual visitation to the Wasatch National Forest here was about 2.6 million. Fast forwarding to 2018, and obviously we're feeling these numbers are changing on seemingly a daily basis. And you can see that with all the development that's happening and in and around our communities. 1.14 million people in Salt Lake County and 10 million annual visits. It's no surprise that, and no secret that we have an incredible quality of life, an incredibly high quality of life, in part because of our proximity to amazing natural resources. And the central Wasatch kind of Salt Lake Ranger District, we've done some analysis, but we see approximately, and I would say these are before COVID numbers, we saw, I heard, for instance, during COVID, Big Cottonwood Canyon saw about a 250% increase in visitation from prior years, just in the last year with COVID. So I would not be surprised if our 6 million annual visits has even increased since some of these 2018 reports. Now, to put it in context, so the Central Wasatch Mountains are a unit of an ecosystem, a unit of the Wasatch Mountain Range, for sure. The public lands inside this area equate to about 80,000 acres. We get 6 million annual visits on this 80,000 acres of public lands. Now, just to contrast that with other public land unit parks, national parks in the region, you can see that we get, based on the acreage and visitation numbers, we get a lot of visitation per acre. We don't, however, get the level of funding that national parks get to steward these resources. A few years ago, in a conversation with our forest supervisor, he said we get approximately 30 cents per visitor to manage this resource. And that is not that money does not go far. So we're stretched pretty thin from a financial standpoint. Tri-Canyon area. So this is an interesting just study region. There's a lot happening in Mill Creek, Big Cottonwood, Little Cottonwood Canyon. In 2014, 2015, Save Our Canyons hired Utah State University to do a visitor study. And one of the findings from that study was just usage numbers, where we wanted to understand where people were going. So we get about 30% resort visitation in this region to 70% dispersed visitation, or non-resort visitation. That dispersed would include things like picnic areas and campgrounds in the Tri-Canyon area. And if anybody's tried to reserve one of those, they know they probably realize it's very, very competitive to get a campsite or a picnic area in the Cottonwood Canyons, particularly on a weekend. And then just a citation from the forest plan acknowledging this, but we need to continue to coordinate and cooperate with everybody. Local governments, residents, businesses, and the recreating public in order to address the growing demands that are facing this region. Part of our analysis was a user. I should note that we interviewed the users, not everybody in the region or in the country. This was a user study because we wanted to understand the use that was taking place. And I separate use from values because as an organization, there is a value in non-use. And we have several members who talk about how they don't really go up into the mountains. They appreciate that they're there, but what they seem to appreciate most that we hear from our membership that is not really a user is the community that the mountain experiences kind of foster and enable. They really feel that the mountains are a contributing factor to um, just kind of our community and our values, and they see a reflection of that. So anyways, you can see a whole host of different activities. Um, we can even fit it on one slide. There's so many different activities that take place in this relatively small region, which is something that is unique to areas like national forests. So now getting into the values, and again, these values are from the people that are visiting and recreating and using the Central Wasatch Mountains. Observe the scenic beauty, enjoy the sights and smells of nature for adventure, experience peace and tranquility. This is one of, I think, the threatened qualities of the Wasatch Mountains. To improve their physical health, to be with friends, enjoying activities. So there is a very social atmosphere. As a matter of fact, one of the findings that we found while undertaking this study, um, the researchers said it kind of flew in the face of a lot of the scholarly research in that there people didn't set out to encounter other people, but people encountered other people naturally with such proximity to an urban population. We asked them about that experience and whether they thought it was negative, neutral, or positive. And the vast majority of people did say that interactions with other people reflected positively on their experience. So there's a cordialness, and it seems like there's a decent ethic amongst the recreationists trying to share this place, realizing perhaps that we're playing nicely together in the sandbox in some instances. We asked about satisfaction and importance, and the correlation of these two. And there were a few areas where satisfaction fell below the importance. And these are indicators that we were a partner with land manager agencies like the U.S. Forest Service and Salt Lake City Public Utilities in this study. And these are messages to them. Where can we make sure that satisfaction and importance are at least on par with one another. Environmental conditions in these canyons got a lower score given their importance, and they're one of environmental conditions were second only to the scenic value of the area. So that's a very important indicator. The availability of parking. There are more people than there are parking spaces coming into that, which we will absolutely be getting into. Trail conditions, the trail conditions are important, but they might not be quite up to snuff. And trail signage, people wanted a little bit more information about where they're going, where they can go, where they can't go, things like that, just to help perhaps reduce some of those user conflicts, and give people a feeling that they are doing the right thing when they're out enjoying the landscape. So we had a bunch of open-ended questions as well, and we basically our team categorized those and got into some repetitive terms. The natural environment scored extremely high, and if you've been up in these canyons or you've looked at the Wasatch, it makes sense that the nature is high. Preservation, watershed, right? People know this is where their water comes from. Wilderness, people are proud of the wilderness areas and that wilderness ethic that has created this sharp dividing line between urbanization and the highest protection we can place on the land in the United States of wilderness. We have 3 federally designated wilderness areas, which are three of the efforts that Save Our Canyons led out on. And it's something we're very proud of as an organization in our history. Protect. There's an acknowledgement that we need to actively protect these places to protect what is important and amazing about them, and keeping it wild, kind of another way to say protect. There's a realization that we have to act. And then the word development. And what the team noticed on the word development is that it was being used both as a positive and a negative. So let's delve into development a little bit. So what they did was they plotted the word development on a continuum. So in the negative, people development of housing and hotels, development of new ski areas or expanding ski areas, putting additional lifts that possibly encroached on adjoining areas to the ski areas adjacent their boundaries, or to the ridge lines in particular, and connections between the ski resorts was noted that it was used a lot in the opposition. In the affirmative, lots of support for the development of trails to help spread people out across the landscape. Acknowledgement that there's a deficit in parking lots, and then noting that we need to develop public transportation options and get people on to transit. Kind of a different way of looking at, should we expand parking lots? Maybe we can just increase transportation into the canyons and not to have so many parking lots. Anyways, they plotted this all on a development continuum, analyzed the survey, and they came up with this idea of a development threshold. And the threshold of those, and again, we'll say this is of the users, not of the average population, or the general population here, or certainly not of everyone in the United States. Very biocentric, not all the way wilderness per se, but wilderness is certainly a value. But biocentric meaning that we want a highly functioning ecology and biology, and acknowledgement that we share this thing with things that are bigger than human interests, which for our organization, that was certainly great to hear, because we feel like that aligns very well with our the thrust of our organization, being very biocentric and protective of the biology of this place. So we learn all that, and then we see what's happening in the world and what's coming to the Wasatch Mountains. It feels like we're on a bit of a collision course, because we have this very strong biocentric ethic. However, there are a lot of proposals to bring new infrastructure, to intensify use, that then drives the need for more infrastructure. And there's a lot of competing values. So, again, the intensity of use versus other values, between natural and the developed, between even different recreational interests. Hiking versus biking always flares up. Resort skiing versus backcountry skiing. Climate change and water, for example. There are a lot of things that we need to reconcile. And speaking of climate change, a number of years ago, we partnered with a student from the University of Utah, a grad student, just to take the snow water equivalent in 2014, and forecast that out based on some changes that we're seeing happening across the Western United States. And as you can see in the lower right corner, there are we have a snowpack that gets to the bottom of the canyons. It looks, we're about, I think, the 7,000 foot level, 7,500 foot level, where we're having constant snow, which is a big change from what I remember as a kid, where it seemed like we constantly had snow in the valleys. Forecast out to 2100, you'll note that about half of the ski areas in the Cottonwood Canyons have consistent snow, and the Park City area really it doesn't have anything above those ridge lines potentially. So climate change is a real factor, and it does bring into question, as we're looking to do things in these canyons, what should be our emphasis and what should be our focus? Should it be on getting skiers to ski areas, or should it be on something else? But that certainly seems like there's going to be a displacement of skiers. We should note about 2/3 of the ski industry is carried by the Park City area. The Park City area accounts for about 2/3 of the ski area visitation in the state of Utah. Those folks are going to be looking for places to go. As we talk about loss of snow, we should also talk about losses of native wildlife, native fauna that have traditionally lived in the Wasatch Mountains, that are no longer part of the ecosystems here. One of our thoughts, our values is, are there things that we can do to bring some of these species back, or are they really gone forever from this, based on what has happened in the Wasatch Mountains? Brown bear, Canadian lynx, wolverine, they're apparently kicking around, because we saw one on Antelope Island just a week or so ago. Northern river otter, wild yellow-billed cuckoo, the list goes on. A lot of these species were gone. It could be a function of climate change. However, it's certainly and most likely a factor of development activity and visitation that comes into this. So this is one of the things that we lose potentially, and what gets added to the list as things go on, if we just continue business as usual. And with the losses, we have additions, right? When something leaves, something fills its hole. So niche in the ecology, if you will. Uh, house mouse, black rats, Norway rats. You've seen the European starling around, I'm sure. Mountain goats, certainly cool to see in the mountains, but not here. They're actually a product of, they're here to sell hunting tags by the DWR and generate money for the state, and have been actually contaminating and carrying disease over to native bighorn sheep populations. So they're threatening other species. At any rate, there's some additions so this is the evolution that we're seeing. So far, these are some of the things that are going on. These are just a few of the needs that we've identified in the Wasatch. We need the protection of places and the protection of values, and they need greater protection and greater permanence than what a forest plan can provide. Forest plans are great tools, but they get changed by forest supervisors. Our plan has been amended, and it may well be amended here very shortly at the culmination of the Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS. And what does that mean? Is it an erosion? Are they going to attempt to maintain the balance in some way, shape, or form? Or is it just a loss? We need to do a good job of articulating the values of this place and understanding the relationship of visitor capacity and capacity thresholds and thresholds in general of this place, and strive to protect those values and key ecological indicators of the place of the Wasatch. Behavioral shifts, change in behaviors over, we should change our behaviors perhaps over changing the landscape. And to do this, I think we need to understand and embody and describe a landscape ethic that needs to be part of this place to help guide policymakers, land managers, at all levels. Because this does not, to us, protecting the Wasatch doesn't simply equate to protecting the public lands. We see uh, local, state, county, and Forest Service collaboration across the board to make this happen, and that's a huge lift. And of course, going back to the 30 cents per visitor, we need more funding for land managers. For too long, this mentality of starving the beast at the federal level and not funding our public lands to the level of importance that they are to our communities. We need to get more funding to our forest services, but also we need to accompany that funding, and not just funding for more trails or more transportation, but actual funding to steward the land and to protect these places, and to do some of the hard work on some of the issues. And I'll touch on this a little bit later, particularly as it pertains to protecting our watershed and protecting against fire, which is a big threat to our watersheds. So strategies. This is just a forest plan, a quote from our forest plan. Protection of the watershed conditions will be a primary factor in managing roads, trails, and access to these canyons. The Forest Service has placed a cap on parking purportedly. However, we don't really feel the Forest Service is adhering to this as they should, as they've identified in their plan. But this is an important component here. Mass transit will be commonly used during winter, reducing crowding and increasing safety for the users of the canyons. So we must, the forest plan does acknowledge that we need transit, and we're not going to build our way out of this by just simply adding more parking. And that's something we worked hard in 2003 to get into the forest plan. So we have some choices ahead of us. As I mentioned, we can change the land, we can build more parking, we can build more roads, we can connect ski areas to help skiers get from one resort to another. We could build trains or gondola type systems, and fundamentally change the land. Or we could change some behaviors and our approach to the Wasatch, improve valley connections, implement tolling type strategies, possibly looking at permitting for uses and activities in the Wasatch, to adhere to some sort of a threshold or a visitor capacity. Capacity and land use. There's a relationship between visitor capacity and land use. So as you can see here on my left, Brighton, Sundance, Mount Hood, Meadows, and pretty much no development at those resort areas, very little lodging, very little year-round population at those resort type communities. And this was taken from a study that was done kind of leading up to Mountain Accord. I think it was as part of the Wasatch Canyons Tomorrow process, just to help people understand the relationship between land use and capacities. So, Alta, Solitude, a little bit more, and Grand Targhee, a little bit more development. And then you bump up to Snowbird. Snowbird, by the way, is only about 1/3 of the way built out. So they have the authorization to get more to that medium level clustered development. But at any rate, that's they're at low level today. Obviously, you can see Park City. lots of lodging, lots of beds, and a much higher year-round population than some of those communities in the Cottonwood Canyons. And I think that really is, that is the extreme fear of what might come to the Cottonwood Canyons with increased visitation. As the snow leaves the Park City area and there's still snow in the Cottonwood Canyons, are we going to see a shift in those beds, or trying to accommodate more of those visitors and pull them over into the Cottonwood Canyons? And what does that mean for the Cottonwood Canyons? And we just like to remind people on our development continuum that our threshold is biocentric, and it kind of is where things stand today. So there's some potential big changes on the horizon. Which brings us to the Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS that I was invited to really talk to you guys about tonight, looking at what do we do for transportation in these canyons. Save Our Canyons is pretty concerned about what UDOT is proposing in these canyons. In Little Cottonwood Canyon, one of our major complaints is that we see the Tri-Canyon area really as a system. If you just look at one canyon and implement something big, a fundamental shift in transportation, it could have a massive ripple effect on other canyons and create new pressures in other places as people shift around. We talk a lot in our organization amongst our board and our team that people are a bit like water in that they find the cracks, they find the low spots, and can exploit them. But they find people are good at navigating some of the changes that we implement on these places. One example was just a few years ago. For Avalanche, UDOT implemented a closure program in Little Cottonwood Canyon. What happened is that backcountry recreationists, dawn patrollers, for example, stopped going to Little Cottonwood Canyon because there were intermittent closures, and it overwhelmed Big Cottonwood Canyon. That's just an example of how people will change their behaviors as we implement policies. So we really think we need to be sensitive to that and holistic and comprehensive. We also have the Central Wasatch Commission on par and kind of parallel, although they're trying to dovetail with the UDOT EIS. I don't think that's actually going to happen in any meaningful way at this point anymore. But they're looking at a mountain transportation system that's attempting to look at transportation more holistically. However, they've kind of fallen into this trap, and I've seen this happen with every single process that has happened over the years, is that we fall into just looking at Little Cottonwood Canyon, fall into looking at just Snowbird and Alta and the ski season. And we just really think that's not the right way to address these problems. They are they need to be part of, but they really shouldn't be steering the ship. We think the ecology, the watershed, the environment of the Wasatch Mountains needs to be the key consideration, not the ski industry. So jumping back into the UDOT EIS, it was basically started in 2015 by a bill before the state legislature, general highway obligation bond. They happen all the time, right? Legislature allocating funding for highway projects and things of that nature. However, this was part of a recreation hotspots is what they ended up kind of calling it. The bill allocated a total of $100 million to be used by the Department of Transportation for improvements as prioritized by the Transportation Commission for projects that, one, have a significant economic development impact associated with recreation and tourism within the state. and two, addressing significant needs for congestion and mitigation. The UDOT EIS is not about solving improving environmental conditions in the Cottonwood Canyons. It is about economic development. You'll note that Senate President Wayne Niederhauser was one of the co-sponsors and drivers for this legislation. He has since left the Utah State Legislature. He now is a part owner of the Lakai development at the base of Little Cottonwood Canyon, where two of UDOT's alternatives that is the focal point of UDOT's alternatives. It couldn't happen without that Lakai property. So Senator Niederhauser authorized this bill and is now the beneficiary, the financial beneficiary of some of these projects. So UDOT's Little Cottonwood Canyon EIS said the purpose in an EIS process, you have a purpose and need statement. It's to substantially improve transportation related safety, reliability, and mobility on SR 210 from Fort Union Boulevard through the town of Alta for all users on SR 210. However, this for all users thing only includes all users between effectively the months of December and March. Again, pointing to the economic development for tourists and intensive recreation uses. They've gone through the process of scoping, rescoping, and rescoping one more time. There have been three times that they have scoped this. They developed a set of screening criteria. They have drafted, gone through alternative screening development, and they have revised alternatives. They're now in the process of preparing a draft environmental impact statement, which will be released at some time this summer, which will feature the agency's preferred alternative. So what are these alternatives that UDOT is looking at? There's basically 5 here. They have 2 enhanced bus options. They have a gondola, two gondola options, and a train option. I think I grabbed an old slide, so my apologies for not incorporating that one. There it is. 2 enhanced buses, 2 gondolas, one departing from Lakai, as I mentioned, and a cog rail departing from Lakai as well. You'll note that all of these alternatives, kind of in the middle of your screen, include these things called snow sheds, which are massive concrete structures that allow avalanches to go over the highway. So they're essentially going to introduce tunnels and covered concrete structures into the road prism in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Many of these will have to go hundreds of feet up and into these slide paths in order to allow avalanches to go across the road a handful of days of the year. UDOT's report said that they would need these structures for 6 to 11 days out of the year. However, it didn't factor the contributions of climate change and that the fact that these avalanche events might not be increasing, rather decreasing. So the enhanced bus, one of the alternatives, this one doesn't include roadway widening. Again, it does include snow sheds. A bus has the ability to stop at a variety of locations. However, the forest plan would need to be amended if it were to service trailheads. So it's really only predicted to service Snowbird and Alta at this point, unless we can either pass legislation that allows for mass transit use to dispersed sites. But this one really is confined to the existing road corridor the only additions to the road corridor would be those snow sheds. And this is one of the smaller, the least costly options. And they do all hinge on, not all hinge, but mostly hinge on new parking garages being built at the mouth of either Big and or Little Cottonwood Canyon, or down on Highland Drive and 9400 South. You have this additional one where they would basically give the bus a dedicated lane so that the bus could bypass traffic jams. You should note with a lot of these that the goal of UDOT is not to eliminate cars from the canyon, rather try to get free-flowing traffic in the canyon. So a lot of these are introductions of new ways to get more people into the canyons. They say it's a 30% reduction of cars on the roadway. However, they're not taking any steps to reduce the number of cars. Traffic studies and US DOT studies on DOTs suggest that increasing a lane doesn't actually increase the number of visitation. It actually increases the number of visitation. So if we're concerned about visitation, widening a roadway could induce that. It could make the user experience on the back end better, I guess. It could give an option at least for 30% of those people who are on transit. But this will also increase economic activity as well in the canyons. A gondola. So they would have approximately 22 or so towers up Little Cottonwood Canyon, loading at the base. This one's at the kind of existing park and ride there at Little Cottonwood Canyon, across from the electric sign and the Little Cottonwood Quarry Trail area, trailhead. There would be an angle station effectively replacing Tanner's Campground, and a gondola unloading station at Snowbird, and a gondola unloading station at Alta. This doesn't really service any dispersed recreational opportunities. It's a almost $550 million project that benefits, taxpayer subsidized project that benefits 2 ski areas in the canyons, and comes at a pretty significant not only financial cost, of course, but also the visual impacts of this will be pretty huge. We've the alternatives report suggested that these towers could be between 200 and 300 feet up into the air in Little Cottonwood Canyon, and about 20 some of them as well. Another issue with some of these is, as we're looking at transit, studies have also suggested that transfers are transit killers. So just most people won't ride a transit system that has more than 2 transfers. This has 3 transfers as a start, and that doesn't really include if you wanted to try and take transit to the mobility hub, for example, wouldn't include the transits that would go into getting to that place as well. So that's a pretty significant issue that's not being looked at. Gondola alternative. 2, this is the one that leaves from Lakai. So they would build 150 stalls there at the mouth of Lakai. They would have 600 stalls at Big Cottonwood Canyon, and 400 down at the mobility hub. So they're kind of trying to spread that parking out a little bit more across the region, but it's still a massive inundation of new parking. I think there's currently a couple hundred parking stalls at the mouth of the canyon today. So, the use that we're seeing is sometimes they're seeing 9,000 to 12,000 vehicles a day in these canyons. So it's still woefully inadequate. but this one does leave from from Lakai. Yeah. And then the cog rail alternative. So this would, this one they're suggesting might just follow the side of the road. There's also a proposal that I think this is on the north side of the road in Little Cottonwood Canyon, because they still want the road to be functional. Remember, there's still going to be a lot of cars on these highways, and there will still likely be traffic jams. There will just be another way to get up the canyon. This one follows the north side of the road, as I said. There's another proposal that the Central Wasatch Commission was looking at recommending. The board kind of shot it down, but it would go up Little Cottonwood Creek, crossing it, I think it was 5 or 6 times. And the cost on this, a train would be able to serve a variety of recreational uses. However, the alignments would wipe out many of those uses, particularly some of the bouldering and climbing areas in Little Cottonwood Canyon, which is world renowned for that climbing activity. But it would come at a cost of about $1 billion. To do this, to just go up and down Little Cottonwood Canyon. And then they are trying to do a few things to improve parking within the canyon. So we don't really feel like this is a true, we felt like the forest plan says no parking, more transit. They're acknowledging that these transit options are really for the resorts and not for the general user or the average user in the canyon. And remember those slides, 30% of the use in the canyons is to the ski resorts, with 70% going to dispersed sites. So 70% of the population isn't really served by these transit proposals. And then they are looking at tolling, and tolling is controversial. As part of our study that I had mentioned earlier, there are some good things that can come from tolling, and there's some bad things. Pros is definitely, when you have a financial assessment on like a toll, it does change people's behaviors when you hit them in the pocketbook. There could be an opportunity to generate some revenue off the tolling, and hopefully that would be able to be put back into these canyons to generate money for land managers and stewardship. It would remove cars and encourage people to carpool. It doesn't really require a big footprint to toll. It can be designed to, it can be implemented around peak times. For instance, we wouldn't have to have a toll all the time. Maybe only, the people have called it powder pricing, for example. It could start up after White Pine is where the toll is assessed. And then there's an opportunity to maybe look at occupancy-based tolls, because I think our interest isn't really in the revenue generation. It is in changing behaviors. Vehicular occupancy in the canyons is fairly low, one and a half to 2 people per vehicle. If we could get 4 people in a car, we could eliminate half of the vehicles in these canyons. Obviously, the barriers to tolling or the cons is that it can introduce an economic hardship for people and disenfranchise people. They're viewed as elite. It's still personal vehicle based, and there is a desire to perhaps have and a vision to have these canyons be carless. And again, it is limited by parking and the ability to get people. You have to provide people places to organize some of these carpools to toll. So, but you are also are still limited by the number of parking stalls within the canyon, which could be a good thing, perhaps, or a bad thing. So the vision that Save Our Canyons has been trying to get UDOT to consider, but they've basically ruled it out of scope. The Central Wasatch Commission has done a little bit better job of looking at it, is really connecting people to these canyons without needing our cars in the first place. Um, we just can't continue to accommodate the cars in these canyons, and the traffic jams and the issues that it's just a ripple effect across the valley. So we've proposed, connecting a connected transportation vision, enhances regional connectivity. It serves all users. It designs a system around values that we seek of the Wasatch, that we're seeking to protect. We don't want more infrastructure into these places. We want them to be perhaps more wild than they already are. Gives everyone an option other than their cars, and well before they get to the mouths of the canyons. Um, it would it could potentially benefit other trips that aren't really canyon oriented. It truly benefits the broader public, and warrants a public investment, because it is geared towards all users and all interests, and it really improves the community conditions, and it wouldn't require massive development in or near our canyons with huge parking garages. The new parking garage at the airport is like I think it's a 3,500 or 4,000 car parking garage. That's the type of a parking structure we would be looking at least one, if not two of them, to park the number of cars that would need to be parked for a carless canyon experience. So on this map here on the right, we're just simply proposing, excuse me, to have better direct service with buses to these canyons. The blue dots represent parking nodes that we would envision to be kind of multi-use developments that would have, commercial, some high density development, particularly for employees. Hopefully some retail and some canyon oriented businesses, outdoor shops and things of that nature. And of course, some parking with direct transit service to these two destinations within the canyons. And it could include buses directly from one of these nodes to, say, Brighton, where you don't have to go through Solitude first to get to Brighton, and then direct to Solitude. You could have a dispersed or a backcountry bus, and similarly in Little Cottonwood Canyon, you could have direct service to Alta, direct service to Snowbird, and kind of a backcountry bus that served a lot of the other users. We could use the existing roadways. We would take a vast majority of cars off of the roads, and I think it could really improve a lot of these communities and give each city within the Salt Lake Valley an opportunity to benefit economically by developing canyon centers that include some of these amenities, generate some tax revenue, and benefit those communities without having to build anything, kill the goose that lays the golden egg, so to speak. So it's clear we have amazing landscapes in Utah, but we do need better plans and policies and a strategy to ensure we're doing right by these places. What people are after in the Wasatch Mountains, I don't believe can be built. It can be lost. We know that. We've seen that. We've discussed that tonight. And so we need to start acting as if these places are irreplaceable, really, because they are. So one of the things that we also believe needs to accompany this transportation and this EIS conversation is to protect the Wasatch. And one of the things we've been working on, we've worked on a number of proposals and ideas. We'll admit our past wilderness proposals have been kind of driven by the Save Our Canyons organization. However, we've worked hard to collaborate with a number of entities, with a number of municipal jurisdictions, a number of users, and even the ski areas on the concept of a national conservation and recreation area. Act. This has been introduced. It was introduced in 2016 to Congress and had a hearing before the House Natural Resources Committee. That's the sponsor at that time, believe it or not, was Representative Jason Chaffetz. We did have Republican, support for this conservation effort. And this entails really protecting the central Wasatch Mountains with this designation that would prohibit road building, that would prohibit ski area expansions for the most part, and prioritize active management of our landscapes and our wild places. We would have a new wilderness unit on the north end, between Mill Creek Canyon and I-80, protecting kind of from Grandeur Peak on the west to Mount Ayr on the east. This is a roadless unit that Save Our Canyons has been working to protect for decades, and it's time it becomes wilderness. This legislation would do that. It would remove wilderness for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. Representative Curtis has taken this element from this concept and run it as a standalone bill, not to protect the Wasatch, but just to remove the wilderness for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. Given all the work, time, energy, and not to mention all of the threats that are coming down, confronting the Wasatch Mountains, we find that legislation to be very offensive. We should really, we're amenable to removing existing wilderness protections, but it needs to be done hand in hand with protecting this resource. It just seems overly political to just be removing wilderness. A few other issues that we've noted: we would really love White Pine, rather than to become this watershed protection area, to become part of the Lone Peak Wilderness. That was one of the areas that got Save Our Canyons started. White Pine is an incredible place, and there's no reason it shouldn't be part of the Lone Peak Wilderness, as it was initially visioned as part of the Endangered American Wilderness Act. And then you have, as I mentioned, those blue areas would become kind of a national conservation and recreation area, enhancing the protections in many ways, solidifying the protections that they enjoy today and preventing administrative changes from coming to them. And finally, there are a lot of public lands within the town of Alta, really between Alta Ski Area and Solitude and Brighton. Alta Ski Area is very aggressively looking to try and line up expansions into these areas. We think that public land outside of the ski areas needs to be protected in perpetuity. It's a small place, but it's an incredibly special place to so many people for so many generations, and hopefully for generations to come. So we think the Wasatch deserve more than these piecemeal approaches. There's so many values to the Wasatch. They need permanent protection. We have to stop quibbling about this, and we have to stand up for these wild places. Remember, they are our watershed. 85% of Utah's population lives within 15 miles of the Wasatch Mountains, and in the second driest state in the country, it's because of our watershed. This is our water supply. That's why so many people live in such proximity, because there's not water elsewhere within the state. So we're asking people to urge all of their elected officials, from the city to their federal representatives in Congress, to reject UDOT's EIS and to look at low impact solutions for transportation to connect our communities to the Wasatch Mountains, the places they want to go visit, to find solitude, to protect our watershed with robust and resilient policies for generations to come. So with that, I'm just going to touch on a couple other quick projects that we have, and then I'll open it up for some Q&A. So one of the other projects, and it's kind of a unique project, I'll admit that I'm a little hesitant about this, but I do think it's important to be a partner with the Forest Service on this. Is a Salt Lake County Protected Watershed and Fuels Reduction initiative that we're trying to start small and demonstrate some success and then grow from there. But a couple of years ago, some of you might remember that the state of Utah tried to remove protections from about 4 million acres of roadless areas all across the state of Utah. Um, roadless areas are critical to ecological health, in particular wildlife habitat. Um, and so, we didn't want to see those removed. However, we did agree with the state that we needed to prioritize the health of these forests. And they said their interest was in, improving forest health, wildlife habitat, and watershed health as well. And we agreed with those goals. We just didn't agree with the strategy. So the roadless rollback was killed. Fortunately, here in Utah, it didn't in the state of Alaska in the Tongass National Forest, where they're now opening that up to logging and mining and road construction. But we were successful in stopping that repeal in the state of Utah on over 4 million acres of roadless areas all across the state. But what we emerged with was the Forest Services and Utah, the state of Utah's shared stewardship. And it ranked watersheds by priority, by threats. A number of variables went into it. But as you can see, the Central Wasatch contains some of the highest priority watersheds in the entire state of Utah. And there are a number of pressures: development, visitation, compounded by drought and climate change that is threatening the forest and our watershed's health. We also have a legacy of fire suppression, and climate change is also enabling the prevalence and propagation of insects that are killing trees at a high rate, creating and exacerbating really the threat of a catastrophic wildfire coming through these watersheds, which can destroy water quality. So we want to go in and do a variety of different treatments that get less intensive as we get further away from the developed areas. There's a need to protect homes from the forest and the forest from the homes. Make sure that these canyons are safe for emergency personnel to respond to an emergency. Of course, to protect the water supply, and maintain a sustainable recreation experience and improve that wildlife habitat that we enjoy close by. Um, because of fire suppression for generations at this point, the Wasatch has been said to be overgrown by a factor of 10. So there's a lot more trees than there should be given a forest of this size. We're also working on the Salt Lake City Trails Plan. A couple of weeks ago, Salt Lake City, opened up some of its trails, and it seemed like it went over a little bit like a lead balloon. We were getting hit hard by our members on this trails plan. We know the city was getting beat up on it as well. We had tried to be a partner in this in the development stages, but the city seemed to keep us at an arm's distance at it. So we're trying to re-engage with the new administration and try and address some of the issues that they've encountered on the first half of the first phase. And we're hoping we can help them be more successful in implementing a trails vision for the foothills between the zoo and Hogle Zoo and the refineries along above Beck Street. This isn't to say no more trails. What we're trying to say is that we need to understand the desires, the needs, and the values of all of the people that appreciate and visit and value these spaces, and not make them so they feel very bike oriented. And I've ridden the bike trails, and I think they are extremely fun, but they are displacing other users. And I think we can push ourselves to do a better job with this, and perhaps not be so intensive with the excavators. And finally, we feel like this initiative, when we are intensifying the use of certain areas, we think we need to do a better job to incorporate protections, permanent protections, throughout the other areas to maintain that balance. And we like to talk at Save Our Canyons about keeping a very sharp edge, that juxtaposition again between wild and urban spaces, and really hold that line. So that's my presentation for the evening, and I would love to. Well, I'm going to stop my screen share here, and I'd love to take some Q&A.
Well, I have a question, Carl.
Sure.
At one point, you were looking at trying to assess how many people could actually could the canyons accommodate, and I was wondering where that was at this point.
Yeah, great question. So as part of the Central Wasatch Commission, I'm part of a visitor use group. We've hired a team to start phase one of doing a research review of what's been done, and trying to understand the background on visitor capacities. And they're starting to, and they're also going to make some policy recommendations. So that's currently going on. So the groundwork for establishing a visitor capacity, not just for Little Cottonwood Canyon, but for Big Cottonwood Canyon, Mill Creek as well, is starting. They've just recently proposed to start possibly doing a phase two, which would start to look at what are the ecological capacities, what are the social capacities, what is the physical capacity of these canyons, to try and again, I don't think these numbers they're not the Bible, but I think they're important factors to consider, because I think there's a lot of choices that come along with the capacity. As I mentioned, Snowbird is at 1/3 of the way built out. The reason they're not more built out is because they need that parking. And so as we change modes, as we change visitors, that could create more pressures for visitation. And I really think that needs to be a consideration as we look at visitor capacity. Not just what is the capacity, but if we choose to exceed a capacity, what does that mean for these canyons?
Right.
So that's kind of where we're at.
One positive I can think of as far as like tolling or busing, and it not being that convenient, and people complaining about it, and the ski resorts complaining about it. For me, it would be a positive in the sense that there'd be less people on the trails. And I really personally don't want to even go to a Big or Little Cottonwood Canyon anymore, because I don't want to run into, hordes of people on all the trails. So I think if we could come up with an effective way to limit numbers up there, I think it would be a more positive experience for everybody.
Right. And that's, I think, if you implement tolling, for sure, that could limit people that way. However, there are other ways to limit visitation, as I mentioned. I think it's controversial, but I don't really think we need to have these hard conversations. What about a permitting program? Maybe you do need to get a reservation. They do it in a lot of places on rivers and in national parks now, right? We're
Right.
doing national park level visitations, and we might need to start adopting some of their strategies.
Norma Wills has a question. Who will make the final decision on the selection of the transit option for Little Cottonwood Canyon?
Oh, that's such a great question, and thank you for asking it. This is a unique project. UDOT in 2017 got an authorization from the Federal Highways Administration to run EISs on behalf of the U.S. Department of Transportation and Federal Highways for highway projects. UDOT is the final decision maker on this, which is awkward. We think, because these are public lands. These are public, federal dollars going into this as well in many regards. So it is awkward to have a state agency and a state that has passed resolutions supporting Ski Interconnect, a state agency that has authorized the monies to go into this to be earmarked for economic development and recreation. I think there's some tension there for sure. The governor has openly stated, this one and the past one, that they prefer gondolas going up these canyons, and we do think that the state of Utah is kind of concocting and leading this process with a predetermined outcome in mind, and has been doing so for quite some time. We are in the process of fighting UDOT to try and get access to public information. They've been hiding information from us. We've had a GRAMA request before UDOT since November of last year. We've been continually appealing to the State Records Committee to try and get access to that. But that is also another thing, concern of ours, is that during an EIS process, the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, is a critical part of community and citizen engagement in these public processes. And for the UDOT to not be granting access to public records and public information could very well be an issue in this process. But to just quick answer for you is UDOT's making the decision on public lands. And the Forest Service published in the Federal Register just a couple of weeks ago that this EIS will be satisfactory for them to amend the forest plan. So not only is the Utah Department of Transportation making a decision on a federal program, they are also leading an EIS that could fundamentally alter and shake our locally created, our forest plan that was created through a federal NEPA process as well.
Ann Ziegler is asking, what is UDOT's, UTA's reason for not wanting participation in solving bus use?
Bluntly, I think they don't believe that buses will provide. I mean, they're bound by the law that Senator Niederhauser passed to induce economic activity, and they don't think buses can do that. I truly believe that's the problem. I also think that they've skewed the problem. You'll note that Big Cottonwood Canyon now gets more visitation in the summertime than even in the wintertime. And I think we'll continue to see that trend shift in Little Cottonwood Canyon and other canyons as well. So they've really skewed this to only look at the winter months. So they're not looking at the big picture, and they've kind of prejudiced buses from the onset. So that's why they're not really looking at them. UTA also, I mean, there's also awkwardness in the fact that this is a Department of Transportation, not a transit organization, running a transit EIS. And UDOT really isn't interested in getting rid of cars. And I think that's why they're really not looking at the bus issue as well. Remember, this money was given to UDOT, not to UTA. I think if the money had been granted to UDOT or UTA, excuse me, to run a transportation EIS, we would see better analysis for busing and better analysis for connecting our communities to these canyons.
You just wonder why they haven't, or maybe they have brought up Zion and the bus system there and how effective that's been.
I know, and it just got awarded to convert all of their fleets over to electric as well. Now that electric technology, we don't have to invest in duals, we invest in cleaner fuels and cleaner energy sources to run these systems as well. And it's just not even part of the equation. And part of my suspicion is that UDOT really has centered everything around the gas tax. And I don't think that they don't have an incentive to get people out of their cars or to move away from gas.
I was also wondering if you were familiar with any data coming from Mill Creek once they started having a toll to go up the canyon. Did they feel, I mean, is it felt that there were less people going up for initially, or I wonder if you even raised the toll, if there's some thought that we could have less cars up in the canyons.
Yeah, I am not entirely sure. I know that the toll booth has been a positive in the generation of revenues that have gone back into that canyon. And they are earmarked to go back into that canyon support, and it's split between the Forest Service and the county. But I think visitation has probably gone up just because the conditions in Mill Creek have improved so drastically since they started tolling it. It's a little bit more pleasant a place to be than it used to be. So, but Mill Creek has its constraints, and as a matter of fact, there was a presentation given earlier this week. They are looking. Salt Lake County and the Forest Service have applied for a FLAP grant, a federal grant from the Federal Highways Administration to widen the road from Elbow Fork or the Winter Gate all the way to Big Water. The existing road width on average is about 11 feet, and they want it to go to about 30 feet. And if you know that it's a very narrow, very constrained canyon, and I think that would probably inundate and decimate a lot of the aquatic life in that canyon. So that's another concerning project that we're following. But that's again, they're chasing highway dollars when they need to be chasing transit dollars.
Right. Well, I don't see any more questions, and I just want you to know that the league appreciates so much you giving your time explaining things to us, and you did a great job, and thank you.
Oh, thank you. And don't ever hesitate to reach out. And if you want to get more involved with Save Our Canyons, we're always looking for people to join our team and help us because the pressures are only intensifying and we need all the help we can get. But thank you all for being such excellent partners. And I've enjoyed working with you, Janine, and with Jan and others with the league. So thank you so much.
We appreciate what Save Our Canyons does. So thank you. All
Sure.
right. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.